Thank you very much, Maria. I will attempt in about a half an hour, hopefully a little bit under a half an hour, to talk about this case study, the Amsterdam Zuidoost Food Forest, which I'm in the process of for quite some time. Indeed, as Maria said, it's a very rich project. My style of presenting is image rich and text poor. So there's a lot of slides, but there's only 17 steps. So it's going to be hilarious. First, I want to explain, as an artist, I've been working for more than 15 years in the public space. That is the area of my practice, my praxis. And in 2005, this is really a foundational work for me. My architect colleagues of mine produced this book, CPulse, Continuous Productive Urban Landscapes, and they describe spatial planning by connecting urban greens to really take over the city. And what you see here is a fictive city, aligning the greens and programming them, and then suddenly making them productive. So this is a foundational piece, and I was able to work with them in 2006 and 2007. Is it going to go forward? Yes. So I started working in the public space as an artist a lot earlier, but in 2010 I get this commission, and I start my foundation, which is called Urbania Hoeve, Social Design Lab for Urban Agriculture, which Urbania Hoeve is a sort of joke on the word the city as our farmyard. So in this period, I'm producing with a group of people. I'm never working alone. I'm working with local people to transform public space, their public space, into a food forest. And I work with lots of people. This organization, and immediately these projects start to show how there can be spin-offs to education, and what they can mean for a community that learns how to design together. So we're Urbania Hoeve, the city as our farmyard, is producing food forest landscape architecture and existing greens with local people in their own public space. And they're becoming co-governors of this space. So now I'm going to start talking about the project that I've been working on now with also with my Urbania Hoeve partner, whose name is Renate Nolan, and she is an expert in ecological urban mowing practices, for example, and beekeeping and cheese making and so forth. And we've been working together since 2017. So this project takes place in Amsterdam Zuidoost. For those of you who know this map, you'll see this is Amsterdam Zuidoost. These green areas are the ecological framework. We're going to zoom in. You see how you start to see the remnants of this honeycomb structure, and also how green it is. And so this project, which starts in 2017, early 2018, is about connecting this space to these spaces. So this is the ecological framework. Here's rural, peri-urban space, and these are park spaces, and we want to make a cohesive structure that serves food, serves humans, and more than humans in the existing public space. So the thing about Dutch urban greenery, though, is that it's designed to maintain for a universal human, and that more than humans, everyone that's not a human is not really mentioned in the governance documents or the governance practices per se. There's a lot of siloization. I'll show that later. And what is also unique about these areas, so green, is that they are the areas of the cities where the most ill health is in the city. And then we're thinking of diabetes 2 and obesity. There's environmental justice, people disconnected psychologically from their space. There is food injustice. These are food deserts. and there is a fear of violence in these spaces. So this project is an attempt to address these issues, or it questions this, and through this production of a community of practice. And also we see in other projects, this is going on, but here we're working with expert citizen groups, or groups that we develop together as an expert citizen group. And they're readying themselves to produce and steward, co-govern public space, urban natures in a different way. This also for reasons of climate crisis that is going on right now, also related to our current pandemic. And so the research that I'm doing asks how groups from civil society could produce a more democratically, zoocratically landscaped public space in conjunction with the natural realm itself, with its ecosystems, soil microbiome, and requisite plant, animal, and microbial communities. So first I'm going to show you just where this space is. This is an iconic picture of Amsterdam Zuidoost, right in the heart of where we're working. You see this architecture that's fantastic. This is also an April day. You see nectar. If you were a bee, you don't care so much about this architecture, but you would care about the amount of nectar available just growing. And so the project is about how do we govern this ecological resource also for others. And so in 2017, this project starts. And this is an attempt to, this timeline, this first part of this timeline is an attempt to tell that story, but actually becomes too complicated too quickly. You'll see that later. And this is when I start working with Renate Nolan. And so we, as Urbania Hoeve, we don't, when we want to build a community of practice, we don't just, you can't just, especially in a place like Amsterdam Zuidoost, you can't just put out an ad, because if you do, like we did, certain things will happen. You'll get a bunch of people that are just like you that want to join your project, and they don't come from the area. And this group of totally enthusiastic people that are knowledgeable in ecological stewardship in many different ways, in regenerative agriculture, permaculture, etc., they are not somehow really representative of the area. So what we do to remedy this is that we go to existing groups that are already there. And what we also do is we present them with the project for which we are commissioned. We say, we want to make a food forest. It will be, we will produce a commons from this food forest, therefore it won't be individual. You won't have your own gardens. It'll be in the public space. We will decommodify it and so forth. And it will, we'll describe food forests like this. It will be of 7 layers. In the existing green space, it has these components to it, that it's dealing with climate adaptation. Does this appeal to you? This is what we're going to be doing with the commons. It will not be your individual garden. It will be a community of practice, and we will all together produce this new culture. Are you interested? So we say, again, to a new group, it's going to be in the public space. It's not going to be behind the unbounded public space even. It will be co-managed, self-managed by us, new management forms. We're going to choose places that are already zoned as green spaces. We're going to make new arrangements with the municipality. Are you interested? We go around and talk to as many groups as we can and say, are you interested in this nexus? Because this is what we're producing. And then what happens is you get a lot of interested people. And so this is already in 2019, the first, say, iteration of the COP, the community of practice, the praktijkgemeenschap you see here in Dutch, is starting to look like. It's made up of all these little different groups. It feeds in terms of activities going on in the city into other groups. And these are the groups that fuel this project. So I'm going to skip these very complicated timelines, which end in frustration. Also, you think the word frustration is even used in the timeline. But what happens, especially in this project, so starting at 2019, is there's a consensus in the group who has been starting to work together and design together. And you're going to see that in the next slides, of what a food forest is, because there's many different ways of defining it. So this is how the group defines a food forest. The next slides are from a presentation we made to Wethouder Evans, Councilman Evans. So this is a consensus document in a way. And we describe, the community of practice, describe the food forest from 3 perspectives: historical, ecological, and social. We also say what it isn't. So, oh yeah, this is the area. You can see a little bit of these green remnants. You see all these parcels. So the first perspective historically is that it's the oldest form of land management, agriculture, and it's applicable all over the world, and that we've been doing it for a while. We explain it in ecological, technical perspectives, that it consists of different plant layers. It's suited to Dutch public urban space, and it has a strong potential as climate adaptation. We also say what it is in terms of layers, consists of these layers, and this is how you can understand it to see how it could be so well added to public space. It has a canopy layer of trees. It has lower, smaller, shorter trees actually that are under them, shrub layers, herb layers, with a woody trunk, a ground cover layer, things that happen underneath the soil, things that climb, viney things that go actually horizontally and vertically, fungi, and water landscapes. And you can imagine when I say those things, how the public space is already filled with a number of those layers. So you can just add. So then there are the social perspectives, and that it is mostly a social, it's a very social entity if we enact it this way. Here you see the group designing together. A food forest requires a lot of knowledge about the location. It creates opportunities of inclusion that are rather extreme and links different groups that would never ordinarily talk to each other. It also creates all these spin-offs for education. It creates, here I repeat myself, some there's a lot of participation available. So any kind of body can participate. People of any age and body can participate in its design and maintenance in different ways. Anyway, this list goes on quite a lot, and I don't want to take too much time. It does create an infrastructure, also a social infrastructure, and it's also in a social way addressing food and climate crisis. But there are also things that it isn't, and this is when we start to get into the area of its governance. It's not only a planted landscape, and it's not suited to temporary planting. And this contrasts with other urban agriculture projects, which are often used as temporary fixes. And this is absolutely not a temporary fix. It's not merely a mechanism to save money. It's really, it's costly. Even after the project is delivered, although the maintenance can be low, people are expensive, and the work that they do is real. It does not lend itself to technocratic problematization, and this is where we get into some fun trouble. It also doesn't lend itself to removal of different layers or touching those different ecological layers according to old management regimes. You see here a tiny little island being completely mowed away. This area is a huge habitat of this whole waterscape. It's like a nexus of this waterscape. And you can see here that it's being, well, we would say destroyed. Other people would say it's being neatened. So there's not consensus on this. But the community of praxis then develops these different formats. So it seems like when you see this picture, you see a lot of scribbles, but in fact, there are only 5 different typologies. And these typologies are additions to the woodlands, additions to the grasslands and how they are maintained, additions and management regimes for the water areas, the banks, additions and management, special management for areas that are highly public, that get more traffic than other places and need to be dealt with in a special way. And then only 3, 4 I see here, but actually it's 3 or 4 educational food forests that look more like a botanical garden food forest, or that experiment with different aspects. We won't get into these, but these different expressions are just showing, yeah, I can build a food forest on 60 centimeters of soil. Yeah, I can build a food forest in an area that is UNESCO protected as the cityscape because of its architectural heritage. And yes, I can build one that looks like a botanical garden. So this is this, I think, very beautiful palette of vegetation is what this is a piece of additive planning at one of the most public spaces, Krimperplein in the Kabuurts, where we, the group, planted and added new vegetation to the spirea with its yellow-red. And so we add this red, we add these purple and mauve bits, and some birds added these mauve bits. And everybody was completely excited. These are the neighbors. This is a highly used public space. This is at the height of the lockdown last year when these guys were self-learning about ladybug larvae and Hot Wheels. And what happens is these plants, to connect the fact that this area was even planted to the maintenance regime, turns out to be a really tricky thing. And what happens is the areas are perpetually, let's call it, cleaned, and it yields this. So you go from that to this because this is cleaned up somehow. And what it's also creating in a period of climate crisis are drought conditions. So here you see later on in like a few weeks later, this is a drought condition. Here is a few months earlier, you see here planting on the banks on this river area, on the lake area, say the Grubbezee. And then because we can't coordinate, somehow all that talking, all those meetings somehow don't amount to it not being mown. So here it is being mown. This is what happens when it's mown. Its soils are getting compacted, and all the ecological benefits, and which is one of the reasons that people are joining this community of practice, go away. They're destroyed, plus trust in the municipality. Here you see also effects of mowing, creating drought, and also water, I won't call it flooding, but water streaming where it shouldn't be. Here we see more drought in a climate crisis. And here we see an example in Amsterdam where it's done right, where we can see, you can just mow 60 centimeters. Let's see. So it's not like we're asking the community of practice is asking for something unusual. Anyway, this culminates in it's called a report by someone from the municipality, Patrick van Beveren, who writes in Inventarisatie Green Inventory, a report about all of the departments, municipal departments that deal with green. And in it, you see a crisscrossing of authority. And it's very non-hierarchical how these public greens are run. That sounds good, but it leads to the destruction you see earlier. This is an amazing report if you like to feel vindicated. But it was written partially, primarily because of this project. Now I see I'm coming up on time. So this prompts this development of this multi-species urbanism concept, which is, as Maria said in the introduction, just urban development and spatial practice generated through reciprocal interrelationalities with humans and more than humans. And it extends the right to the city and the right to the urban metabolism to an alliance of more than humans, of which we are a part. So I won't get too far into this, but it's inspired by these different literatures. Indeed, it's coined by me in this publication. And it has 12 tenets, which I also won't get too into, but I am going to show some of the community of practice at work, and also at work with a number of these tenets and how, and one of them has to do with valorizing learning resulting from the practice of reciprocal relationships with the natural world. And actually where it falls short, I mean, it also has, it can only go so far. But the community of praxis has produced a soil archive of the entire area that's rather detailed, actually. It's an amazing piece of citizen science, and it yields also these beautiful chromatograms which show how much soil life is already present in each area. Shows also how much the community of praxis knows about its soil and ecosystem microbiome. It also addresses how the community of praxis is working, addresses how the landscape architectural imaginary can be extended beyond the nature of the culture, and heritage of monocultures. And this is where we get into governance issues a lot, because these mandated projects somehow get a little bit more power and weight behind them. Here we see some original designs of how green, this is when it was like from 60s, I have to actually get a year for this picture, but an early picture of the same structure, and you can see the green parcels that are now not really there. And you see the planting plans of Siegfried Nassut, and now how ecological self-management is being thought of by a group that is charged with protecting the architectural / landscape architectural heritage. So actually it's going very far away from this to a very bald way of working. And it reveals disagreements in how these kinds of spaces should be governed, like we are assigned these little spaces here, whereas the community of praxis would say, FABAZO, Amsterdam Zuidoost Food Forest, concerns a management regime which could flow over all of the areas. So I will skip now most of this and get to the end, because I'm running out of time, but you can see some of the people in the group working together, participating in a campaign to make other neighbors aware. Imagine a food forest here in 4 languages: Twi, the Ghanaian language, Surinamese, Sranang, Dutch, and English, and at important sites, and designing together. And let's see, I'm just going to really pile through some of these pictures. Here are designs. Here's a 60-centimeter wide food forest that's 1 kilometer long. Planting design, walking routes, food that everybody is foraging already, winter purslane, combined with theory and recipe making. And in contrast, actually, this is a map of how the cables and the pipes are going. I find it a contrast. I think I've taken enough time. I think I'm going to just skip ahead to the end, the credits actually of this project, because I want to also show you how big the community of praxis is getting. But also to show that at this point, it's not just a community of praxis of these people. We now have dedicated municipal partners from the Chief Science Office that have been a real motor behind this project. And now also so very interesting urban planners in here called a municipal process manager that is linking with these two people. This team is linking us with these other different departments in an attempt to actually change the management of these greens to co-management. So thank you very much. I hope we'll have some questions. I'm sure we will.
Thank you very much, Debra, for it's great for some familiar with the work, but I'm sure everybody else is as excited about this project as I am. So I would like to, enter the question and answer session, and I would like to invite Jules to coordinate that part of the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Debra, for this very nice and also very visual presentation. It was also nice to see all the pictures and the maps. Let's collect 2 questions each time, and maybe you can then answer the 2 questions at once. And everybody who has a question, just raise your hand electronically, then it will be very clear. Or if you have a lot of environmental noise, just put your question in the chat, and then I can read it out loud as well. So Nikki, first, please.
Thank you, Debra, for a wonderfully rich and inspiring presentation. I truly enjoyed it. I was wondering, how do you reconcile, let's say, when social values of these kind of initiatives differ from ecological values or interests, when they run counter to each other? For example, when planting more forest maybe would create more unsafe spaces. Or so how do you reconcile the two? Because we cannot assume they always point into the same direction.
Yes, and Francesca?
Thank you, Debra. We talked many times about your project, but this presentation gave me a very complete view of it. So I have 2 questions. So we talked also about, and you mentioned the frustration of working with municipalities and stakeholders. I don't want to go there, but I would like to ask you if you have suggestions on how to integrate your approach with the policy-making approach. And the second question is very closely related to what I do. So how the relation with nature and working with nature can help to build a community. You mentioned a community of practice, so I relate to that. Thank you.
Thank you for both of these questions, Nikki and Francesca. Nikki asks, how can we reconcile initiatives like this and this kind of planting with notions of safety? One thing in this project, we don't use the word safety unqualified. We use the word perception of safety. And one of the practices that we are repeatedly enacting as part of one of the methodologies, radical observation it's called, we do a lot of walking in the public space, walking, talking, designing. And so it familiarizes people with their space. One of the groups we we call them, we call them the Ghanese women's group because it's a group of Ghanese women, otherwise also very diverse, had been going on walks in the neighborhood before, not always with a police officer. I mean, there's, speaking of perceptions of safety, but we notice that through walking and feeling like you're a designer of a space, suddenly the space seems more like a sidewalk and a dark forest. Well, actually, there aren't that many dark forests. And there's a notion of the rhythms of these spaces and what the kinds of activities that are actually going on. And anyway, well, I don't know that we systemically reconcile. We are aware of it. We speak about the perception of safety in all of the designs, also in blocking views or keeping views open. It's a subject. Also safety, like how close should children be lured to water because there's an activity near water or a busy road. So it's something that we talk about, but we use the word perception of safety. And Francesca asked, how can it be integrated into policy? And yes, well, that is a very interesting question that is only now becoming revealed since, I think, May. Is that true? Yes, because we have this process manager whose job it is to connect and protect this project from what ends up being, according to not just our flaky artist practice, but also it ends up being systemic, according to this Inventarisatie Groen report. It's very hard to connect to these silos, these departments that don't even communicate with each other, that trust processes that actually end up not working. We find that out through the project. So this new role, and actually it's a team that she manages, and a constant set of, or say, regular meetings and constantly meeting each other has yielded a document, which is called Ambities en Randvoorwaarden. And this document, so ambitions and conditions, on the fly translation, and it means that instead of going through, let's say, the normal processes of changing how green is managed, that all these different groups meet regularly and speak about some basic conditions so that we understand each other. And so not only do we get to know each other through this set of meetings, which I guess could be some kind of mini sub-case study all on its own, but we make agreements about them that we try to follow. That's the good side. So it yields paper documents and policy and things, words and vocabulary that we all agree about. But in the end, as of, for example, this week, no, it was last week, it doesn't solve all the problems. Having things on paper doesn't make it so that your project doesn't get mown or destroyed. So right now, for example, Leander Vattenfall has, I think, 60 cubic meters of infrastructure on one of the food forest locations. They just parked there. And that's not supposed to be happening. And everybody agreed, and everybody put it in the maps, and the maps have been made, and they were made like this, and they were made like that, and they were shared with this person and that person, but still they're not, it's somehow not completely foolproof, but we're working on it. At least now we call each other up and don't curse.
Lucy and Luca afterwards.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the presentation, and it was really great to learn about your project. I was curious about the choice for food forest as a particular form. I do research on urban gardening, so I'm a bit biased towards that kind of space. So I was wondering why a food forest, and what can it enable that perhaps a community garden couldn't, or what were the reasons for this choice? And one thing in particular that I'm curious about is the temporal dimension, because in my understanding, food forests are quite a long-term investment, and I can imagine that that will come with some challenges, both for the practitioners and perhaps also for the governance actors. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Debra. It's really a fantastic project. I mean, it's incredibly rich, also incredibly hopeful. But the question is about something else, because among other things, is of course also your PhD research. So can you tell us a little bit about that? So what is the focus of your PhD research? How is that integrated in all the other components of the project? That I think would be very interesting.
Okay. Save the most difficult for last. Thank you for both of these wonderful questions. Lucy, why food forests? That has to do with our bias for climate crisis mitigation. In food forests, soils aren't touched, or in our form of food forests they are. So it's very much a regenerative agriculture approach. It has to do also with the size of the parcel and an attempt to actually change microclimates. And this is based on research done by soil biologists and biodiversity scientists in the Urbania Huva studio in Amsterdam North, where we have produced a 60 centimeter deep soil microbiome with 15+% organic matter. And it's just incredible. I can show you these documents, but, and also changed seasons, actually different seasons than outside on the other side of the street. So it's microclimate, climate crisis mitigation. This is an area that stores water, is sometimes 10 degrees cooler. So that's the reason why. And it, again, food forests lend themselves, or public space greenery lends itself to this kind of change, to this layered approach, because some of the layers are already there. Also compared to, for example, the maintenance of different kinds of urban agriculture, where soils are constantly I would say destroyed or turned or broken up. That is something that we wouldn't do, because we're storing carbon in these spaces. So that is the bias, and also the ability to link them to larger ecological frameworks. Yes, the longue durée, that is a problem. It's a problem because in our cities, we have also agreements that are made with developers that sometimes are really also longue durée. Like in 2040, we have to, we're already supposed to be excited that we get to keep this for 20 years. That's somehow, as opposed, I mean, even though it's known that we're with these kinds of plantings sequestering carbon. So there's maybe, we hope that when it becomes time for these spaces to be in 20 years to become apartment buildings, as it is planned now, maybe there'll be a different way of thinking about carbon sequestration and water sequestration. How does it connect to my PhD research? Luca asks. And this is something that is being guided and developed, but it in the first instance, in terms of the governance, its governance, and a notion of right to the city, and how and who, how can we define this right to the city, and who should have it, and what that is going to mean. For example, will more than humans, I include humans in a more than human alliance in this large socio-natural assemblage, this more than human alliance. If we extend the right to the city to more than humans, what does that mean? Does that mean that the soil microbiome, for giving its ecosystem services, has a right to carbon and water, and that could be somehow regulated or demanded? And so that is the area where I'm mostly looking. I'm connecting the literatures of conservation and grassroots projects changing policy, so that I'm combining different literatures to make a coherent plan for this, which it's a way which will be describing this multi-species urbanism. Maybe for academics to produce a manifesto is putting the cart before the horse, but I'm also an artistic researcher, so we always put the cart before the horse. Because the cart before the horse means that you've got your contingent scenario, and you can suddenly, you have a model which is going to fail and open up all of the areas of inquiry in a very visceral way. I hope that answers the question.
Jochem has a question, and afterwards Van Gelderen.
Thank you, Jules. Yeah, also a very fascinating project. It is a very good end of the day for me to be submerged in this presentation. Thank you for that. I think my question is about transferability of concepts, and maybe also relates to the kind of question Luca asked, the bigger picture in which you are framing this beautiful project. I think you mentioned food deserts as a concept, and I interpreted it that this project is a way of countering that effect of food deserts. And that it's a concept very much developed in the US context, US cities. Okay. Happens elsewhere as well. But I wondered whether you could explain to us to what extent would you consider Amsterdam Zuidoost or parts of Amsterdam food deserts? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know, and I have problems imagining it. Mm-hmm. Environmental injustice was another concept which you raised, and what kind of environmental injustice do you see in Amsterdam Zuidoost, and how does this project relate to that?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being able to join this meeting. I'm not familiar with the concept of food desert, but my question is about the role of food actually in a food forest, and how is that gonna work? How is it getting harvested, and what is the quantity of food coming from this food forest, and does it play an important role to the participants? That's a bit my question.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to combine parts of about the role of food in the food desert, and then I'll answer Jochem's the first question that Jochem asked about the transferability of concepts. Amsterdam Zuidoost is absolutely a food desert. If you go shop, if you go shopping there, you will probably be shocked. I'm making assumptions about you, but I think people in this Zoom call would be shocked that the same Albert Heijn could have different food or amounts of fresh food actually. And so it has to do with access and availability of fresh and affordable food, and also practices knowledge about how to deal with that. So for example, Albert Heijn is very, very present in also probably people in this department know more than I how Albert Heijn situates itself in the city and how it functions. Like they have an entire real estate department, and there's nothing accidental about their placement and how much space they take up. And not just Albert Heijn, but the other Albert Heijns, the Lidls and Dirks and so forth. And again, they have different food than they have than my Albert Heijn has. Let's just say it like that. I showed you one slide that was of the winter purslane. It was this completely green picture. Right now, this is not something we planted, by the way. That is just there. It's there because people, it gets somehow, this seed gets dumped into bird feed, and people like to feed birds there. So in certain places where people like to feed birds, you'll find a lot of this winter purslane, and winter purslane spreads itself. It's a weed. It's really nutritious. Right now, you can go around if you wanted to have a restaurant serving 99 different types, ways of recipes for winter purslane. You could do that. In a month or two, you could serve rocket. Rucola is just abundant. It's growing everywhere, and it's not widely harvested. So this food desert also has to do, and this will connect to the notion of the how is there food injustice? Oh, that was environmental justice, but I'm going to connect them. It's that there can be food available, and there can be nature, and there can be recreational space that is green and cool and comfortable, according to some people, that is not accessible to everybody. So this project also accesses through the community of praxis a lot of people that, for example, their role in the community of praxis is not so much like, digging and planting and carrying shovels around on their shoulder and walking around with a wheelbarrow, but they are ambassadors of the neighborhood, or they're very good cooks, or when we develop recipes together, they're a good sounding board for getting people acquainted with eating nettles and purslane and rocket, or eating that amount of leafy greens, which people in a neighborhood where sometimes you're in a group where there's, let's just say, 99% obesity, that so these are people with a different approach to fresh leafy greens and eating it in different amounts than probably a lot of people in this room. So the projects like this try to break that open. Concerning, so there, yeah, this question about the transferability of concepts. I believe you're asking that in an academic context, but
well, you already provided 99% of the answer to that question as well. So
okay,
you can continue with other questions as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Great.
You're welcome.
Tuna then.
Yeah, thank you, Debra. It was fantastic to listen and see what you were presenting us. Very colorful, very interesting. I have two short questions. One is more conceptual, a bit connected to what Jochen asked. He asked about transferability. I will ask you to what extent and how can we turn these into transformative practices in urban planning? So how can we take this experience, the learning from this experience, and tell municipalities or policymakers, okay, this is a good form of policymaking, try this as a formula? Is it possible? The second question is very pragmatic, because I partly live in one of the most polluted cities in Europe, Antwerp, where whatever we put on the ground in our gardens, we are not suggested to eat because it's so polluted and dirty. So to what extent this, I mean, it's a very technical question. I'm just curious. How can you eat something that is planted in the city? Is it safe? Is it clean? Is it checked? It's just a pragmatic question. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you for your question, Tuna. I will answer the easy part first about the contamination. In projects where we're using the actual soil, I would always assume that the soil is contaminated. But one man's, what do they say? One man's food is another man's poison. There are organisms that just love this stuff. And their food forestry and regenerative agriculture focuses very specifically on regenerating soils and producing ecosystems where leaching, wind erosion, water erosion, and touch accessibility to potentially contaminated materials is mitigated. But also, there is a very big issue because we don't like to spread unnecessary fear with this thing called uptake. And uptake is more exciting than if there's contaminated materials in a city. If you live next to a road and you have a white windowsill, wipe your finger across it and you can just see tire dust and particulate all over the place. I would say wash the apples, but also there are plants can filter, provide barriers to pollution. They metabolize different kinds of pollution. There's pollution and then there's pollution. There's pollution we can handle, and that can be solved a lot of times by food forest planting, strategic plantings of, let's just think of it of barriers or lacy kinds of foliage and etc. But also the ways of creating highly microbial soils where fungi metabolize these, let's just call them contaminants. There are certain contaminants I wouldn't want to get near, and certain ones that I don't care about too much, because you can just plant plants that will, you can assume that there's contamination of, for example, heavy metals, and just plant plants that don't take up heavy metals in the part that you eat and that keep it away from you by touch or wind. Now, the transforming practices in, was it this morning that Maria Kaika just showed a publication of which she is co-author with Astrid Drauf about another such project in which projects like these that are experimental, there is a wealth of literature about this, and I hope that this project is contributing in a valuable way to that literature about, say, experimental artist, action researchy kinds of projects that want to scale up and make a change. They run into certain kinds of systemic problems that's going on in this project as well. So can they be useful? I would say yes. They make very clear what kinds of problems we have in our governance systems that affect all of us. Can we fix it? I mean, can we, do you think that I think that they will, that there will be vindication and victory is another ball of wax, and how soon, and probably not in a flag waving kind of way, but in a little inching kind of way. It's already, I feel very positive that there is a person that is a process manager in this project that links us to these different departments. However, when we So when Urbania Huva as a project manager delivers the project completely to the community of praxis, which is constantly, you know, this thing that's supposed to happen. Yes, how successful will a group of people that in the end join a project because they want to be involved in growing food and enjoy having a place that feels more where they have increased ownership, are they going to have, is that feeling going to carry them over and having meetings with all these people or calling up 7 people when Leander puts its containers and pipes on your food forest? I don't know. I don't think so, actually. I think that it might, things that we just weather, project managers or project initiators just weather in that normal citizens or people in the role of citizens will not weather, and they will, it'll break up the community of praxis. This community of praxis has been reconstituted 3 times. We're in our 4th iteration due to these kinds of processes. So fingers crossed.
Thank you, Debra.
Welcome. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you very much. I think we should leave it to this as it is almost 5 o'clock. You can always contact Debra individually, of course, if you have any further pressing questions. Thanks a lot, Debra.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for contributing.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you, Debra.